Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome to Relationship Rhetoric. I'm your host, unapologetically Angela. It is so wonderful to be able to meet and greet with you. I am still in Egypt, and I am really excited about the journey that I'm on. It has turned into something totally different. I am here on a temporary teaching assignment. By the time you view this, I will probably be back in the States. But reaching out to share some perspective on traveling abroad and learning about what the self awareness process is when people are traveling and moving and are natural nomads. I have met some amazing people, and I strategically choose people that I find very interesting. And tend to stand out in a subtle way, but they definitely catch people's attention. So the young lady that we're about to speak to right now is she's very cool. Her perspective on life is very fun. She will talk to you and debate about pretty much anything. And I like that about her. I like that about her. It doesn't matter who's in the room, who's talking. She has a perspective on it. We just did a 5K run here. Well, we didn't run. We did a swift run, jog, walk. She did do the last mile and a jog, but just being around her, it's always cool when you can be around a person and not necessarily always be talking, but be in good company. So I experienced that when I am around Christine. So she is um I guess a pro at this because I'm still a novice at this teaching abroad thing, but she has traveled quite a bit. So we're going to get her perspective on the teaching abroad experience. Hello. Oh,
Hi.
I
Thanks
like
for
your
inviting me.
hair.
What?
Your hair looks different.
No, I haven't done anything to it except sort of leave it alone.
Okay.
I mean, pearls, you can't coax them, so you have to
Yes,
sort of let them do what they're going to do. So it happens to be a good day for me.
it is a good day. It looks great. So how was your day today?
It had its challenges, but you know what?
Mhm.
We got through them, and
Mhm.
tomorrow's a new day without my troublemaking class. So hopefully it will be better.
Nice, nice, nice. Okay, well, thank you for agreeing to be on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
So let's jump into it. Okay, first, how did you know or express your interest in wanting to teach abroad? Where were you? When did this happen?
Sure. So it was about 10 years ago, and I was living in Hawaii at the time. I've always been interested in foreign cultures. So when I was in university, I studied Chinese and Japanese. And because of that, I moved out to Hawaii to work in tourism after university. And Hawaii is a beautiful place. I had a fantastic time living there, but it's very expensive. And I was struggling to sort of make ends meet. And I also hadn't been internationally since university. So I decided that it had been long enough and I needed a big change to sort of get me out of my rut. And a few years before, I had heard of a volunteer teaching program in the Republic of Georgia. And I looked it up and it was still available and it was starting in a month. So I decided this is it, this is the time to do it. And once I got into that classroom and started traveling again and in a place of the world that I never expected to be, it was a revelation moment, and I realized that this was what I wanted to keep doing.
Okay, so I remember you mentioning Georgia. What part of the world is Georgia in?
So Georgia is in Eastern Europe. It's north of Turkey and it's south of Russia, and it's in between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So
Wow.
it's kind of an unknown, or not very well known country. It has a very small population of about 5 million people. And it has its own unique language. Most people assume that it's Russian, but it has its own unique language with its own unique script as well. So it was just, I knew nothing about it before I started looking on Wikipedia, and I found an old travel guide in a used bookstore and just started putting the pieces together. It's a beautiful little country, very, very unique culturally, and I feel really honored to have gotten the chance to explore it, even just a little.
Wow. So it was a volunteering teaching job. So how were you able to survive? Like
So they did
living?
pay you. They did
Okay.
pay you a little bit. It was about 600 lari per month, which is totally enough to live in the country on that kind of money. And we were living with host families. So the program recruited teachers, brought them in, and then sent us to rural village schools. My school had 72 kids from first grade to 12th grade, and we were living with local host families. And so every month we paid 200 lari to them, and then we had 400 lari left for ourselves. And with that money, I was able to travel all over the country without spending my own money. And the program also included 2 annual return flights. So they would send us home for Christmas vacation and they would fly us in and out at the beginning and the end of the year. So your expenses were covered as long as you were willing to live simply. And that's never been a problem for me.
Wow, nice. Okay, so how long were you there?
One academic year from orientation was 2 weeks in August, and then we taught from September to the end of June.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So then from there, where did you go?
So from there, after I decided that, yes, this is a career I wanted to explore, but obviously I would need to make some money out of it, I did my TEFL certificate and I went to mainland China because I figured I already spoke some Chinese from university, although my Chinese was very rusty and not good enough for the job. But it was a start. So I went to mainland China and I went to a southern city called Guangzhou, which is just above, about 90 minutes above Hong Kong. And there I worked in an early childhood facility, what in mainland China they call kindergarten, but which teaches kids from ages 2 through 6. And I was there for 2.5 years.
Okay. Okay. And how was that experience? Well, I mean, you love to travel, but adjusting to the culture, how different was it from Georgia?
Very different from Georgia, and I have always had kind of a little bias against mainland China. It's because that was my first international experience back in 2007. So that was when I was back in university, and I was a very, very shy junior in college. Got heart palpitations when I had to talk to strangers, kind of thing. And I went to Beijing for the fall semester to study abroad, and the program that I went with was not very well set up for non-native speakers, and I had a really hard time getting around the campus and figuring out my classes and making any kinds of friends. And so I spent the first 3 months of those 4 months in essentially hibernation in my dorm room, and I would only go from my dorm room to class to the store, and that was it. So after that experience, I thought I need to go back to China and confront those, that difficult experience I had and see if I can do better now that I have more international experience. And unfortunately, the school in Guangzhou, even though it said it was in the city, was not. It was actually in a new development about an hour and a half outside of the city, where I was the only foreigner, probably within 30 or 40 miles. And so basically my my life became from my apartment to the school, which was in the same complex, so there was no traveling. And then I would travel very minimally on the weekends. But again, because I was the only teacher at the school for more than a year, it was hard to make friends because China has a lockdown on most social media. So it was hard for me to make friends, hard for me to connect with people because all I had was the weekend. So after a couple of years of that, even though some new teachers came to the school, I thought, I'm finished with this, and now I should probably try and get my teaching license. So I moved back to the US to
Okay.
do that.
Okay. So in that time period, though, what did you really discover about you? Because you had to be a trooper to go through that.
It was intense. It was very much, for a while, because I was the only teacher there, and because most of the other teachers preferred not to speak English in their off hours, and many of them couldn't speak English, and my Chinese was not good. So it was an experience of, you have to look internally and find your resources. You have to give yourself things to look forward to, and you can't necessarily go outside. You can't go to a concert or go to a movie or even just walk around in a shopping center, because where I was, there was really nothing. So it was a matter of, I like reading, so I read a lot. I like creative writing, so I did a lot of writing in those 2.5 years. And it was connecting with friends back in the US, and it was thinking of what I would do on the next vacation. It was a lot of sort of internal voyaging. So I'm glad to be able to be a little external again, but
Right. Okay.
we got through
So
it.
From there, where did we go?
So I went back to the US because I thought it would be easier to do student teaching in an American school if I was actually on the ground in the US. A lot of schools internationally won't take you if you don't have a license. So, and I wanted to be certified for secondary education. I was afraid that I was getting a little bit typecast in the early childhood bubble. I love early childhood, don't get me wrong, but after a few years of teaching the alphabet, I wanted to have more complicated conversations.
Right.
So went back to the US to where my parents were living in Virginia. And I lived with them for 2 years while I did my online certification program and did my student teaching. And it took 2 years because I got a series of terrible jobs in education because working in the US is not the most fun thing to do, as I'm sure you know. But I finally got it. And after I got my license, I moved out to Taiwan. And that was where I've been for the last 3.5 years. The first 18 months or so was at an after school language center. And then the following 2 years were at a public middle and high school.
Okay, so when you say an after school learning center, so you were like the after school program for
Exactly. So
really?
not necessarily affiliated with a school, but
Okay.
sort of language centers, tutoring centers, things like
Yeah.
that. They're very popular in East Asia. A lot of students will finish their normal academic day and then they will go on to one of these centers where they can get tutored in English, they can get tutored in math, they can be supervised while they do their homework. So it was that kind of center. So I was working mostly afternoons and evenings from 2 to 8, and it was large group classes, and you were teaching conversational English. And for some of these kids, it was the only time during the day that they had to talk to a native English speaker. So that was very interesting, really high energy, lots of, you had to be playing games with the kids and really encouraging them to talk and working on their conversational skills, not only with you, but with each other. But it was a lot of fun, and it was very different from the more traditional daytime education than I'd done before. So I really started putting in a lot of games to what I was doing in class, which, you play games in early childhood, but this was, you had to do games all the time because you were working with the kids for 2 solid hours. So you needed to make it fun.
Right, right. Okay. So where were you living? Were you living, did they supply housing for you?
So they gave us a housing allowance, and I actually ended up being a roommate with one of the other teachers there who turned into a really great friend of mine. And we actually still talk to each other, even though we have both left Taiwan now. She's in the UAE, actually. So we're still kind of neighbors.
Yeah.
But yes, so I stayed with her for the first couple of weeks because she had a house, she was renting a house, and she had a whole separate floor that nobody lived on. So I moved in there, and that was supposed to be temporary while I found my own apartment. And after those 2 weeks, I'd been looking around and I thought that, hey, it would actually be cheaper for me to stay here. And she and I were getting along really well. And so I think we both brought it up at kind of the same time because she asked me, so, you don't have to move out if you don't want to. There's plenty of room. And I was like, well, I was looking and I don't think I can do better than here. And we're getting along and your cat's like me. So why don't we just stay here? And that's what happened is I stayed with her and I ended up moving out first to the public school, but then I actually helped her get a job outside of the school we'd both been working at because I'd interviewed there and gotten a job offer and not taken it. But I forwarded the contact information to her. So she ended up working at the school that I didn't work at. Um, but we continued to be friends throughout my time in Taiwan.
Nice, very nice. Okay, so we're leaving Taiwan. Was there a break between Taiwan and Egypt?
A short one. So I ended up going home for just about a month. I had to stay in Taiwan to do summer camp, which lasted until I think July 7th. Yeah, about July 7th. And I flew out right after summer camp ended and stayed in the US with my parents for about a month. I usually stay with them between contracts or during summer vacation. And then I got out to Egypt. The plane landed on August 7th. So it was
Wow.
just short of a month. to turn around and pack my bags again and get ready for a totally different country.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So, in all of these, which would you say was your most memorable?
So, most memorable, I think, would have to be Georgia, just because I went in almost completely unspoiled. I had no preconceptions about what the country would be like. And overall, it was an amazing experience. I learned how to be so much more self confident and self reliant than I had been up until that point. Um, I had a 2 week crash course in the Georgian language and then picked up a book on my own and had to learn how to use it to communicate a lot with my host family, and then getting around the country by myself or like in a small group of people, all of whom had the same language abilities that I had. So we all had to kind of work together. So learning how to do that was absolutely huge because, as I said, I'd been a very shy person. And it's still something that I struggle with is talking to strangers, and the way that I get over that is just by sort of forcing myself to do it.
Mhm.
Um, and just seeing the sights there, it's a very naturally beautiful country. Like there are waterfalls, there are mountains. It's very, very pretty there. And culturally, it's also very interesting. They have their own branch of Orthodox Christianity. They have a history of, castles and things like that. So there's so much to see. And at the time, it was a lot of change was happening in the country. They were revamping a lot of institutions and preserving a lot of their old cultural sites. And it was just kind of like you sort of felt like you were in a place that was relatively undiscovered, and being able to discover it was fascinating.
Nice, nice. Okay. So now in all of them collectively, if
Mhm.
someone was like, so what are the challenges of teaching abroad? What would be your top three?
I would say probably mainland China in certain cases. And my suggestion would be to very clearly ask the school about where exactly you will be posted and where you will be living, because China is full of megacities. And that means that you could technically be in Shanghai or in Guangzhou without any of the benefits of living in a major city, which is what I discovered. So after that experience, I learned to be much more careful about asking, are there any other teachers at the school, if that was important to me? Where exactly am I going to be living? Where am I going to be working? What kind of transportation is available? And looking up the address very carefully on Google Maps, just to sort of see what's in the area. So China taught me a lot of not taking things for granted. China also taught me that there is a certain point at which it doesn't make sense to stay in your job. Um,
Mm,
and towards the end of my time in China, I really butted up against like recurrent problems that I have sometimes with anxiety and depression. And it was just getting kind of worse and worse. I probably stayed there about 6 months longer than I should have, just because I felt as if I was obligated. I was the first teacher in the school. All of the students knew me, all of the parents knew me. But it just wasn't a good fit after those 2 years, and it wasn't getting better. So that was another thing that I really learned in China, is that you have to kind of know your own limits, especially when you're abroad, because you're lacking a support system that you can depend on.
yeah.
And one of the things I also like about this job is that if you're into it and if you have experience, any kind of experience really, there will always be another school that you can go to. You don't really have to worry about not being able to find a job. As long as you are willing to travel and go, you can almost always find a school that will want you. Maybe it won't be better, but it might be different.
Right.
And maybe it will be better. So you never know. And so China really taught me about my own personal limits and when I need to walk away from a career, from a position.
Nice. Nice. Okay. So when you leave Egypt, what do you think your next jump is going to be? What are you
Well,
thinking about?
I've spent most of my career and my academic life in East Asia. I have traveled a little bit in Europe, but not nearly as much as I want. I think Egypt will settle me for the Middle East. I think this will be perfectly fine for that part of the world. So after this, I think I'd like to go to South America because I've never been to South America before. And I think Spanish will be easier to get into than Egyptian Arabic.
Mm, definitely,
But yeah,
definitely.
I even tried last year. I interviewed with a few places in Chile and one school in Panama. So I think I'd like to try getting into South America.
Okay. All right. Very good. So overall, if there was teachers who are interested in teaching abroad, what advice would you give them? You gave some great advice about China, but just as far as what should they look for on the applications? What questions should they be asking at interviews?
Right. So I would say a lot of schools out there will try and get you to work as much as possible. There are plenty of schools that say, well, our average workload is 25 classes a week. But in your contract, if they send you a contract, which you should always read your contract, have them send you a contract. If they don't send you a contract before you agree to the job, don't go with that school. Okay, we'll start there. Always read the contract very carefully. And in the contract, most schools will say, these are your average classes for the week, and then they'll have a higher number. If a school has a higher number, assume that you're going to be working that number because a lot of private schools that are based on, saving as much money as possible, they are going to probably ask you to work up to those hours even if it's just a few times a year. And knowing what the maximum you could be made to work without being in violation of the contract is really important because if you're a teacher, you know how exhausting it is to teach. So just imagine that you're teaching 7 classes a day with one free period. And if you think about that for long term, you're just like, I can't do that. But if you do get into a school where that's the case, and you just say this is too much work, they can say, well, it's in your contract, we didn't lie to you, it was there, even though they can say, well, your average workload will probably be this. And I've known that to happen to a lot of teachers. Other things I would look for in terms of green flags, your school should always pay for at least one round trip airfare per year, always. A school that doesn't pay for your airfare is not really worth it. They should usually either include free housing or a housing stipend. And I would say that your housing stipend should cover at least 50% of the average cost of your rent. Ideally, it would be more, but it should probably cover at least 50%. And then you can budget out how much of the rest of your salary you should or you are willing to pay. I would say know your personality. If you're the kind of person who needs to have other foreign teachers at the school to have kind of built-in friends or a social group, you would not be happy if you're one of a small group of people. I have been at a school on my own, and in some cases it's terrible, like my experience in China, because I was just not only alone at the school, but I was isolated in terms of geography. I've been on my own at a school in Taiwan, and I loved it because I was within an hour of Taipei, and the rest of the time I was in a coastal city. So I could walk along the beach every day and not really feel lonely. And I knew that the city was super close. So know your personality. What do you need around you to feel happy? Do you need restaurants? Do you need a movie theater? Do you need people? Do you need cultural sites? And look very carefully into all of that and ask the school for specifics, a specific address of where you will be working and then where you'll be expected to live or the general neighborhood so you can look that up before you go. And the other thing is ask them about student behavior, existing discipline systems, cell phone policies, and extracurricular expectations. Now, sometimes that won't really help you, but at least they are really important questions to ask because, again, you could get into a school where they say, oh, our expectation is that you do an extracurricular activity every day. And again, that's in your contract. So if you sign it without really reading it carefully, and then you go back and say, why am I staying late every day? Your school can say, well, we're not in violation of your contract. It says it right there. Student behavior, of course, just because you want to sort of know what you're getting into. discipline systems, because you want to know what recourse there will be for you in case you do run into discipline problems. Cell phone policy, just because it's a real pain to get them off of their phones if you have no way of enforcing that backed by the school. None of these are certainties, but I think they're very important questions to ask.
Okay. Very good information. I wish I would have known you.
Well, I'll tell you, I asked all of these questions, and I'm happy in some respects with our current position. And in others, I feel like I was not given an accurate assessment of certain things.
I love
So
it.
it's not foolproof, but it is, I would say, those things are good screenings, because there are definitely some schools where you can see that they don't offer you. Oh, one more thing, sorry, health insurance.
Mm,
Always health insurance. You shouldn't be paying for your own health care. So some schools will sign you up for the national system, and that works fine. Other schools will sign you up for private insurance, but always have health insurance. That should be covered by the school.
okay. Great. Great. Well, thank you so much, Christine. This was wonderful information. I
Yeah,
knew
you're
that
welcome.
you were going to be a wealth of information. So I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm glad that, or I hope that some of this information is helpful. Again, not in all cases, but I would say that there's some good things to look for.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to send you a copy of this so you can have it for your reference.
Great, thank you.
And it'll be something I think you should share because there are a lot of teachers out here interested in wanting to teach abroad, but they're so nervous because this is a big jump. This
It
is
is
a
a big
big
jump.
jump. Yeah.
100%. But I would say that if you love the profession, but you hate all of the red tape around it and you're tired of feeling like your whole life is your job, I think this is a really good choice to make. I did my student teaching in the US, and the students were well behaved, and I liked my mentor teacher. But there is something very exciting about being able to leave your school and then walk out and be able to explore something entirely new. It
Mhm.
is scary, but you'd be surprised how easy it is to get around the world if English is your first language.
Mhm.
It's
Very true.
hard for the rest of the world, but for us, we're actually quite lucky.
Very true. Very true. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing your information with us.
Thank you.
And I'll see you in the morning.
I'll see you in the morning. Get a good night's sleep.
Thank you. You too.
Have a good one.
You
Bye.
too. Bye bye. Yes, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that was helpful for some, not just for teachers, but just for people. You know, there are a lot of things that we prevent ourselves from doing, from taking that leap. And it doesn't have to be a long term situation. Do what you need to do to be able to just push yourself to that limit. If it's for a month, if it's for 2 months, if it's for 6 months, whatever it is, instead of just telling yourself, hey, I'm going to go this place for 3 days or whatever. Go and try your best. Set aside, make a bucket list to go and try to be somewhere for a month, maybe 2 months, maybe three, and actually see how you gel in the cultures. Because that's when you truly, to me, figure out what your personality is. Like Christine was saying, what do you need around you to feel whole, to feel complete, to keep your sanity? Because in your comfort zone, you may think it's one thing, but when you're pushed out into the world and you have to figure out and go internally to find those things, man, you learn so much about yourself that you shock yourself. So I'm a witness to that. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing and greeting you guys real, real soon. Thank you so much. Peace, love, and teaching abroad.